Okay, this movie was written by two series writers, and it felt like a big, long, expensive episode, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the content itself was not big budget movie level material. And eventually it fell back to the habits present at the end of the show, which was the Picard and Data hour. But Data's part was forced as hell, and Picard spent half the movie sitting around on a bunch of rocks.
Yeah, there were definitely too many different subplots going on at the same time that were too unrelated. And if they had taken the time to just focus on one or two things and flesh them out better, the whole movie would have been better.
Well, that's usually how the episodes went. In the show, one or two characters would have the runtime dedicated to them and their growth. Everybody else's writing either served as support or dictated that they weren't in that episode period. But because this is a movie, the writers said, well, every main character in a movie has to grow because it's a movie. And that completely bombed here. There were too many characters for them to handle, and even in the show, some of the main characters' development was thrown aside. So you have a shaky foundation to begin with, but you're saying everyone has to grow here.
And I would argue that the only character that actually comes close to a legitimate arc in the movie is Data. But for most of the movie, he's dealing with things kind of in the background or off on the side. Even his interactions with Geordi don't amount to much, and he really only interacts with Picard once, who's already busy with more important stuff, and then he interacts with Troi at the end.
The thing that bothered me the most about him is all of his plot points and growth were things that already happened in the show. We've already seen it.
At least Data did change in the sense that he is keeping his emotions at the end of the movie, but that's not a positive change.
The character who got the least was Troi.
As usual.
Although it was probably a super easy paycheck for Marina Sirtis to collect. Troi's contributions ranged from very little to nothing for this entire movie. She probably only had 5 lines of dialogue, and the writers eventually just stuck her at the helm once the ship separated because they couldn't figure out anything else for her to do. I could totally see someone who wasn't familiar with Star Trek walking out of this movie asking, who was that one woman that seemed like she was supposed to be important?
She had that scene with Picard, but it was obviously more focused on Picard.
Yeah, so someone would say, was that his wife? Why was he talking to her like that?
They could have had Troi bring up things about her own background, like struggles with her mother, what her mother went through in half a life or something, or with her dead sister, and something else to try to relate to Picard.
Having Kirk at the beginning of the movie, and then not show up again until the last 20 minutes of the movie, was very lame. He clearly wasn't a part of the movie until someone during the writing process decided to throw him in. And the fact that only he, Scotty, and Chekhov showed up was pretty clear proof of that. I know they wanted Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley, but both of those guys read the script and said, what is the point? This movie is not about our characters at all. And in my opinion, if you cut out all of the Kirk stuff, you would not have lost anything.
That's true.
What a marketing ploy. He's even on the damn poster. And of course he's like, I gotta be higher than the other guy. When he and Patrick Stewart were together, it was really interesting watching a good actor next to one who was not. And William Shatner himself wrote, or probably ghost wrote, a book where Kirk is resurrected. And in that book, he sacrifices himself to save the entire universe, or whatever. But of course he doesn't die there either, because there's even more books after that, and he even narrated the audiobook version himself. How's that for ego?
Speaking of the differences in acting, I thought the only 2 genuinely good performances in the movie were Picard and Soren. But that doesn't mean that Soren was a good character. I thought the performance was good, but he has absolutely no development whatsoever. We know why he wants to get back to the Nexus only because they told us, because Whoopi Goldberg told us. We know nothing about his life before the Nexus or what he experienced in there. We don't have a sense of him as a person. He's just the bad guy.
So did Soren build all of the walkways and shit down on the planet? Because it seems like there was a lot of extraneous stuff that wasn't needed.
Yeah, I wondered about that too. Because it's an uninhabited planet. Why does he need to have that rocket launcher right on that specific rock?
Yeah, up on that weird precipice. Put it on the ground. Guinan also being the omnipresent narrator to explain things to us was very silly. Her presence in this entire movie wasn't needed either. If you cut out all of her, you really wouldn't have lost anything.
Well, I disagree, because the movie would have made even less sense if she wasn't there to explain it. Although her explanations bring up more questions than anything, I guess.
So it sounds like you agree with me.
I don't know. I guess kind of as I'm saying it. But it did make me think about her powers and how Soren relates to that. And I read that they originally intended, or at one point they intended for her experience in the Nexus being the cause of her powers, being the source of her powers. And I wish they had left that in there because it at least would give us an explanation. It would have made as much sense as anything else. But they cut it out, so now I just have more questions.
And with the Nexus thing, it was really easy for Picard to leave, and it seemed like most of it was just realizing that he was in it. The whole warning of spending eternity there rang pretty hollow, and his whole time there was so rushed anyway.
Yeah, it didn't seem like he really had to struggle or anything. At the same time, I feel like I would have been just bored if they wasted more time with that. I do agree it would have made more sense, but it's not something I would have wanted to see.
You just don't like kids. Or Christmas.
I don't like happiness is the thing. That's why I participate in these reviews.
The Duras sisters?
Felt like they were in there just for fan service.
Yes.
Because they're so hot.
They showed up multiple times in the show, but this being the resolution to their arc was so lame.
We didn't really bring up the fact that they died, but that's their end.
The whole MacGuffin of the trilithium didn't work, considering the fact that it's already a well-known substance in the show and common space pirates cart it around all the time. Soren dangled the trilithium weapon schematics above their head, but that never went anywhere. It would have made way more sense if the Klingons had gotten this new weapon, and that's what they were threatening the Enterprise with, and then the Enterprise could have gone through their whole plan of forcing them to decloak, instead of doing the whole Geordi visor thing.
And from Soren's perspective, he keeps questioning Geordi about it, but he doesn't need any more information because he already has the rocket set up and everything.
So they didn't have enough runtime or plot points, so they just shoved in this random stuff from the show. I have the most questions about the time distortion ribbon doorway.
Oh man.
Did the ribbon just brush Kirk on the Enterprise B? Because there were multiple decks worth of damage done. Was Kirk the only one who ended up in the Nexus? And Picard giving Kirk a cursory synopsis of what was going on was enough to bump Kirk out of the Nexus too? What about other people who were in the Nexus?
Yeah, because when they rescued Soren, he was one of 5. Did the other people have the same drive to try to get back to it, but just weren't smart enough to figure out a way?
And after the energy ribbon wiped out the 2 ships and ripped Kirk out into space, Starfleet apparently did some research because Data found all the information later, but there hadn't been anyone in the 80 years after that kept up with this thing. That seemed unlikely, especially considering its infamy tied to the Captain Kirk. And was there no other place that this ribbon passed through during its decades-long loop? Destroying 2 stars was the most effective plan for Soren?
And again, destroying the star doesn't seem like it would affect its trajectory.
Let alone 2.
Well, 2 would do twice as much nothing as 1.
What is the difference between running into the ribbon versus the ribbon running into you? Whether the stone hits the glass or the glass hits the stone, it ain't gonna hurt the stone. And wouldn't big chunks of the planet also be dragged into the Nexus? Why is it just the people?
And of course, we don't know anything about how the Nexus actually works or where it came from, and that doesn't exactly make it a satisfying story element. There are times when having mystery can work, but I don't think this is one of them.
Even more so because everybody knows where the wave is at all times, and they can just go check it out. It's not like it only appears once every 10,000 years and nobody knows anything about it.
Yeah, all the convenience of, oh, we know how it works because of Guinan and we know the path and everything, just accentuated how much of a MacGuffin the whole thing was. And even the fact of how it makes you live your deepest desires or whatever, it's just all too convenient. And wouldn't interfering with that pre-industrial civilization be violating the Prime Directive?
That is the least important thing at this point. Overall, this movie felt pointless and
Nonsensical.
And was just milking the franchise after the show had ended. And naturally, there are, 3 or 4 more Next Generation movies after this one?
Yeah, I can't wait.
Be sure to check out our reviews of those. They'll be just as positive and optimistic as this one.
If you were giving the movie a grade the way we did with all the episodes, what would you give it?
Low. What about you?
Was there anything that you liked about the movie?
Yeah, when the Enterprise crashed into the ground. I'm not saying as a joke, I actually liked that part.
No, I agree. I liked that. I definitely thought the best part of the movie was kind of right in the middle, when they're fighting the Klingons and that whole crash section. That was the only time that the movie was really semi-exciting or engaging.
So essentially the part that had nothing to do with the main plot of the movie.
And it still didn't make sense either, the way they handled that stuff. I think if I were going with a letter grade, I'm fluctuating between a C- and a D+. And the only reason I would potentially go as high as a C- is I thought they handled, for the most part, the transition to a movie from a TV show fairly well in terms of production.
Yeah, the mechanics of it, just not the narrative structure.
Yeah. I will say, though, that I wasn't a fan of the way they lit certain things. I commented on how gross the lighting was in 10 Forward, but even the bridge, everything just looks completely different. You don't have to completely change everything just to make it look like a movie. You can still make it look like the show, but do higher quality cinematography.
Agreed. Yeah, I'd probably be in D range for sure.
Yeah, I think all the problems, I think I would go with a D+.
I'd go with the D. So, thanks for watching. It only took us forever to make this video after we finished the series.
Well, we were stuck in the Nexus that whole time. I was living in a world where we didn't have a YouTube channel and I just didn't want to leave. So come back in 2 years when we get to the next movie.